Hello and welcome to another episode of Oklahoma Senate on Deck, the podcast from the leader of the Oklahoma Senate, Senator Greg Treat. Senator Treat, how are you doing today?
Doing excellent. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you join us today on the podcast. As we record, this session is just a few days away, and that's an exciting time of year here at the Capitol. What are your thoughts? Do you have nerves, jitters, a lot of things going on as we prepare for the first day of session?
I don't have nerves and jitters now. I'm excited. You know, we had a lot of success last year working across the aisle within the Senate, across the rotunda with the House,
right,
and on the second floor with the governor. So it was a really good experience last year, especially coming out of the previous few sessions.
Yeah, those were brutal.
Work together, collaborate, and actually get things done. So I'm actually walking into this with no trepidation at all. Excited, know that there's some issues that we have to deal with that are serious and weighty, and the budget isn't as rosy as we'd like it to be, but we're in a much better position than we've found ourselves in a long time.
And this time of year, there's a lot of organizations that invite you, the speaker, the minority leaders from both chambers to events to give previews, and attending some of those with you and hearing everyone talk, there's still a sense of optimism all the way around. We have our disagreements, but everyone's still excited that this is going to be another positive year.
Yeah, we've had the state chamber, the Oklahoma City chamber. I have the Edmond chamber tomorrow, and Putnam City schools, and you hear that all. And I did Tulsa chamber a few weeks back. Just attended, was not on a panel there. Will be soon, but yeah, that sense of optimism I'm finding everywhere I go in the state. I had a deal in Ponca City with Senator Bill Coleman, and you just hear that everywhere.
Yeah, it's really great. Oklahomans are hopefully a positive group of people, and we're building on a good year from last year. So heading into this year, what do you think? What have you been telling these groups when they ask what are your priorities heading into the 2020 session? You
know, last year, build on that success. Make sure that we don't take it for granted that we're going to work together. It takes a lot of work and a lot of communication to stay on the same page. So continue the effort we did there.
Right.
Last year, we devoted a lot of this podcast to talking about law, legislative office.
Yeah, our listeners know about that, so
yeah,
they can give us a tutorial on it.
So I won't go into a lot of the details on that, but it's an extremely important entity, and it's important that we get it right. So we're in the process of trying to hire a director, get that off the ground. So I want to make sure I see that to fruition and make sure that we get off on a very solid footing.
Yeah, that first hire is going to be very important to set the tone.
Oh yeah, and then continue our efforts with transparency, although in an earlier press conference I kept calling it transparity, created a new word, but transparency, and then federal. I'm really kind of passionate about an issue on federal grants. A lot of times these state agencies, they will seek a federal grant, and then that federal grant has a shelf life of 3-5 years. But it builds a constituency, it builds a dependency on that grant, and sometimes for very good purposes.
Right.
But it wasn't in the governor's plan or the legislature's plan. So the governor, this interim, actually addressed it through an executive order. And the beauty of executive orders is the governor can do it. The downside of an executive order is once this governor is gone, then it goes away.
Yeah.
And so I've got a bill to try to codify that to say, hey, I think that's a great idea, Governor Stitt. Let's put that in state statute so that will last well after both of us are out of this building.
No, that's a great idea. And those things you talk about just oftentimes appear out of nowhere, it seems, here at the legislature, because it's not a program that went through the normal committee process and bill process that we're aware of. It's not anything that the legislature directly appropriated money and then all of a sudden someone's knocking on your door saying, I'm going to lose these valuable services. Why did you do that to me? And it's usually because a federal grant went away.
Federal grant ran out.
So this idea of transparency will be awesome so that we know what's coming in the door and what may be ending and how to prepare for the end of that and whether we want to.
And most oftentimes they're for good purposes.
Right.
Sometimes they're completely counter to what the legislature and governor want.
Yes,
those are the nefarious ones. But most oftentimes these are really good purposes. But we need to be able to plan and budget for these things and make sure it's something we would be doing absent the federal enticement to do it. Because we're going to be picking up the tab at some point.
Right, transparency. That's the word of the day. Transparency.
That's transparency. I'll try it again.
And this was something they did in Indiana, right? Had good success.
Yeah, Indiana has a whole office dedicated. It's OSBI, but it's not the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation.
Crimes, maybe just dollars and cents.
Yes. They came and testified when we did the loft interim hearing a year ago. I was impressed with it. I'm not sure if I'm quite ready to go to an office yet.
Right.
I've talked to Governor Stitt about my desire to codify it, and I want to make sure we continue to build on it to make sure that Oklahomans have control over what their state agencies are doing.
So those are some important things for the session, and there's going to be lots of things coming up. And of course, here on the podcast, we'll talk about them each week and give our take. And so we want to give a pitch to everyone to stay tuned and hear what's going on in the Senate. Speaking of Governor Stitt, as we record this today, he had a huge announcement on health care, and he announced his plan, SoonerCare 2.0. From what you've heard about it and what you've been told a little bit now, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited that there's a potential to have an Oklahoma plan that allows us to have flexibility and not be locked into a rigid constitutional constraint.
Yes.
I'm hopeful that when I see the plan that I'm just as excited about it. I've seen some details. The governor has briefed me briefly on it, but I look forward to actually getting down into the details, making sure that these things work and that there's not any unintended consequences. But really the bottom line is getting people healthier, getting people access to care, and making sure that we provide preventative care to keep people out of the emergency room, to try to make sure that people in rural Oklahoma and underserved areas of the metro get the access to care they need. There's a lot of strings that come along with federal money. It sounds like this one has a lot more latitude and a lot more freedom. So I overly use the word probably cautiously optimistic. I'm optimistic and not as cautious. And I will tell you, one of the things that caused me caution before was a lot of times these are 6 to 18 month process.
Right. Yeah. We all know the federal government doesn't move quickly. Just about anything.
Very, very slow typically. But to see the governor stand up with Seema Verna, the head of CMS, and the health secretary, and a policy person from the White House, gives me more comfort that this could be expedited and this could be a reality quicker.
Because those are the people who are making the decisions, essentially, on the state plans, the state seeking waivers or the state seeking ways to innovate. And so, if like you said, if it's true they're blessing what Oklahoma wants to do, that's a huge hurdle.
Well, and I applaud Governor Stitt. He deserves a lot of credit. If we can get this done, regardless if it gets done or not, his innovation, his leadership, his tenacity to try to get something done like this to deliver for Oklahomans should be applauded.
And I like what you said at one of these forums, was that this looks like it could put us in control of our own destiny, and that's when we talk about healthcare and Medicaid, that's where we want to be. So because healthcare trends and costs and things change in the future.
Well, and just different states have different needs.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, Oklahoma has a higher child mortality rate. We have higher rates of obesity and hypertension and heart disease, diabetes than some healthier states. And so we've got to get on the right track. We've got to make sure we invest wisely and be able to tailor it to the needs of Oklahomans.
So, speaking of Washington, D.C., a few people may have missed this, but the presidential campaign kind of had an impact here in Oklahoma, and that is one of the candidates, Senator Bernie Sanders from, is it the state of Vermont? Is that?
I believe that's right, yeah.
Senator Sanders, a presidential candidate seeking the Democratic nomination, wrote an editorial in one of the local newspapers and had a few things to say about education in Oklahoma, and I guess it may not be a shock that Senator Sanders wasn't a fan of what we've done in the last couple of years, but I think that's mistaken by him for a lot of different reasons, and I know you had some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, it was a cheap publicity stunt. He literally mailed it in, it sounds like, maybe emailed it in, and tried to just be critical and not know the realities of how much we've actually invested in public education, common education over the last 2 years. We shouldn't deny struggles we've had, but let's celebrate the successes we've had. We're building on success. We've invested just over the last 2 years over $630 million new dollars into public education, and we've continued to have to pump in a ton of money on all the pension systems, but in particular teacher retirement. We've been doing $339 million last year. It's always been in the 330s. So for past failures to invest in education and retirement and stealing from the pensions, we're having to play catch up right now. And the, Senator Sanders.
What could we have done? What could we have done with that money today if we didn't have to put it to the retirement? If the retirements weren't used as a slush fund to pay for projects
Years ago, yeah.
Years ago.
Well, just imagine.
I mean, I guess
you could put that toward roads. You
Right.
could put that toward education.
Right.
You could that $630 million that we put in over the last 2 years could have been another $660 million
Right.
added on top
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
The past failures to invest in those pension systems, to invest in roads, to invest in education, we're still paying the price tag for that. But Senator Sanders just took a cheap shot. He was trying to win some political favor. He talks about some national $60,000 salary that he's going to force for teachers nationwide. I think it was just trying to get publicity for his campaign and take a shot at hardworking Oklahomans while he's at it. Obviously didn't receive it very well. But the problem with education is not that we have too little federal government involvement.
That's right.
The problem is federal government provides about 10% of the funding and about 90% of the headaches. And to turn over
That's agreed.
to turn over more to the federal government would be the absolute last thing that I would want to do, or the people of Oklahoma, I believe.
Right, and we hear it time and time again we don't want any more federal intrusion into education, and this would just be more of that. I mean, the Common Core, all kinds of things like that have come down from Washington, D.C., and we've heard time and time again from Oklahomans that they're not big fans of that.
We need to continue to invest in education in Oklahoma. I think Senate Republicans, House Republicans, and Democrats on both sides too, and the governor have shown a commitment to that end. And for someone just to email it in and say, hey, everything's terrible in Oklahoma,
That's right.
I think is awful. But hey,
And let's not forget, the budget annually is almost 50% towards common and higher education, or close to that.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a priority here.
Let's talk about D.C. though, because a few things we talked about. We talked about the governor being in D.C. to announce. We talked about Medicaid, and what we're really talking about there is the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare.
Right.
We talked about D.C. pushing something down. We've got a presidential hopeful that is trying to say, hey, he's going to know better than Oklahomans.
Mm-hmm.
Just FYI, I get a lot of emails from people. I have nothing to do with the impeachment process.
This is a good public service announcement.
Yes, and just Civics 101. I had an email just 2 days ago that said, as the leader of the Senate, we demand witnesses. I can probably get someone Mitch McConnell's email, but I don't have any control over that.
That's right.
I don't have a vote on that. I can't ask questions in that process.
That's right.
It's a serious process, and I don't mean to make light of it. But really, I encourage people, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably didn't make that mistake because you actually care what's going on in the state government. But help us educate people on how the levels of government work and how we can do better. I would love to have a more robust civics education, and I'm looking at that. And the more I read my emails, there are a lot of really informed Oklahomans, and then there's a few that get really upset at me for things that I have no control
Right.
over in D.C.
A few years ago, it was one of our senators made the front page of the newspaper because he tweeted out, "Dear Oklahomans, rest assured I will not vote for Betsy DeVos to be the Secretary of Education." And obviously, she's the Secretary of the Education Department at the federal level. Again, that's nothing that we do here in the Oklahoma State Senate. But it's a good lesson, and yeah, reach out, help people to know. And I see that a lot, monitoring our social media channels. People will send us messages or news stories and ask us why we're doing this on the impeachment trial, why we're not doing that. So it's a good thing to remember. And it's dominating the news cycle as well. It's every time you turn on Fox News, CNN, that's all you're bombarded with is the latest in the impeachment trial.
Hey, we're going to do real business, not to belittle the work that people are doing in D.C. There's a lot of good people that we send from Oklahoma and other states do as well. But what we do here impacts your daily life
Yes.
much more in most instances than what's going on in D.C. And that's not a knock on our federal delegation. It's just get involved, pay attention, email us, send us questions. I'm always interested in what's going on in Oklahomans' lives and trying to figure out how we can better serve, better lead. And man, I just look forward to the session. I think it's going to be awesome. I look forward to working with Governor Stitt, Speaker McCall, and Leader Floyd. It's going to be I think it's going to be another great session.
Well, we're real excited around here at the Oklahoma Senate, and we are looking forward to another great session as well. We're going to have podcasts regularly to keep Oklahomans up to date on what's going on, talk more about civics probably. We want to.
We're going to have transparency and transparency.
Transparency and transparency. You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
So as you're listening to this, we encourage you to leave comments. If you're seeing this video on social media or listening to it on your podcast, leave us a comment. You can send us an email here at the podcast on deck at oksenate.gov. We'd love to hear the topics you want us to talk about, or if you have questions about the process, or questions about a bill, or questions about something going on in state government, maybe not the legislature, but something happening in the agency, we'd like to hear, because we're here to help in that regard. So we just appreciate any comments you give. We always appreciate a rating and a thumbs up as well. What do you got?
I'm going to interrupt you. One of our very first guests on this podcast was U.S. Senator James Lankford. And if you are interested in what's going on in D.C. in the impeachment process,
Right.
He has a wonderful, I think, outreach to Oklahomans and really to the world, giving his perspective, reading his notes, telling what happened that day. And I really strongly encourage you, if you're interested in just hearing a wrap-up of what happened from a first-hand experience, I'd really go check out U.S. Senator James Lankford's Facebook and Twitter. He does a nightly overview on it, and I've been looking at it, and it's been really insightful to me.
We can't talk about it now because it would take too much time, but my favorite difference between the Oklahoma state government and the federal government is that we have to pass a balanced budget every year. They do not. They probably haven't passed a budget in several years. They run on continuing resolutions. Again, that's a topic for another day. But Senator Sanders, if you're listening, remember Oklahoma has a balanced budget. Unlike Washington, we can't just print money and spend money endlessly. So,
excellent point.
Well, that's what we have for today. We appreciate you listening. Senator Treat, thanks for joining us. We hope you tune in next time to Oklahoma Senate on Deck. Thank you.